Did you ever think that disappearing into the woods might help you forget someone? But what if the forest doesn't want you to forget? Ramona Hale, 45, left behind her entire life in Florida after discovering her husband's years-long affair. She moved into an unfinished cabin in the woods of McCall, Idaho, where no one would find her. But each night, something or someone watched from the trees. Not hunting, just waiting. What she found wasn't a monster. It was a presence as broken, as cautious, and as human as she was. Based on real journals, old cassette tapes, and stories passed down by locals, this is not just a tale of Bigfoot. It's a story about forgiveness, quiet grief, and the invisible bond between two wounded souls. One human, one not. As you're watching this, may I ask, where in the world are you tuning in from? What's your name, dear listener? Could this story reach someone else who still believes in compassion, even from the shadows of a forest? If this tale touched something in you, consider liking and subscribing to help us build a community of people who don't just believe in Bigfoot, but believe in kindness. Sending you a warm hello, wherever you are. The motorhome growled low as it pushed its way up the winding mountain road, the last of the autumn leaves brushing the windshield like soft warnings. Ramona gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles white against the vinyl, her breath misting faintly in the chill air inside the cabin. The heater had quit somewhere near Cascade, but she hadn't bothered to fix it. Cold seemed honest. It fit. Out the wide front window, the horizon folded into layers of pine, gold-streaked aspens, and distant snowcaps that hadn't yet decided if they would stay for the season. The wild looked untouched, as if it had forgotten humans ever came. Ramona didn't mind. She wanted to disappear into something that didn't ask her who she used to be. The photograph was tucked under the visor, already creased from being opened and folded again too many times. In a moment of impulse, she yanked it down. Her eyes darted briefly toward it, then away. There they were. Herself, smiling in a white dress that no longer fit her soul. And beside her, a blank patch. His face had been ripped out, torn with one swift motion in a diner parking lot outside Sacramento. She'd left the ring in the coffee mug. She didn't need a goodbye. Not after what he'd done. She passed the sign for McCall, population too small to care, and followed the dirt lane that the old man on the phone had given her. The tires kicked up clouds of ochre dust. On either side, the forest pressed in like a crowd that didn't know her yet. Somewhere in that silence, something ancient stirred, watching. The cabin sat half-built on a slope above a frozen creek. Cedar planks stacked along the porch, one window boarded, one hanging loose. It looked like someone had tried to finish it and lost the will halfway through. Still, it had plumbing. Sort of. Power. Maybe. It was cheap, and for Ramona, that was enough. A knock startled her as she was fumbling with the lockbox code on the front porch. "Ramona, right?" The voice belonged to a tall, thin man with a smoker's cough that echoed from too deep in his lungs. His wife stood behind him, wrapped in a puffy pink parka, holding a grocery bag like a peace offering. "Howard and Marlene Cutter," he said, adjusting the strap of his overalls. "We own this patch of heaven and a few around it. Figured we'd drop by, make sure you got in all right." Ramona nodded, grateful and cautious in equal measure. "You sure you want to be out here all alone?" Marlene asked gently. "Winters are cruel this side of the range." "That's sort of the point," Ramona replied, managing a smile. Howard coughed again, deep and rattling. His eyes flicked toward the tree line behind the cabin, lingering a second too long. Ramona noticed something in the way he didn't meet her eyes afterward. "Price was real generous," she said. "Almost too generous." Howard's face twitched. "Well, not many folks are looking to be neighbors with the trees these days." As they turned to leave, he paused and looked back over his shoulder. "Rough name you've got, miss." Ramona blinked. "What do you mean?" "My mama's name was Ramona," he said, voice suddenly soft. She passed just last spring. Sweet woman. Liked birds, hummed all the time. He looked toward the mountain ridge again, eyes dull. Rough name, he repeated. This forest remembers faces. You keep that in mind. That night, the wind carried no song. Just the creaking of branches, the scrape of pine needles against the eaves, and something else, something heavier. Ramona lay on the lumpy mattress she'd dragged in from the motorhome, watching shadows stretch across the ceiling. Somewhere outside, she swore she heard footsteps. Not rustling, not scurrying, steps. Slow, deliberate. Too heavy to be deer. Too confident to be bare. She reached for her camera, the old Pentax her mother had given her before she passed. Ramona had always photographed skies, night skies. Stars made more sense than people. She opened the back door quietly and set up the tripod. The stars above McCall were clearer than she'd ever seen them, like pinpricks on black silk. She took the shot, then another. When she reviewed the negatives by lantern light, her fingers stopped. There, at the edge of the frame, just beyond the reach of her cabin's back porch light, stood a shape, tall, broad. Still, the forest breathed. Or maybe it was her. The next morning she heard a knock, 2 short raps and 1 long one, on the front panel of the motorhome. It wasn't Howard. It wasn't anyone she recognized. A boy stood there, arms full of firewood, cheeks red from the cold. "You must be Ramona," he said, setting the logs down with a soft grunt. "Graham said I should help if you're staying through snow." He introduced himself as Ethan Chase. 14, wiry and quiet in the way of kids who spend more time in the woods than in town. "You know these woods?" Ramona asked, handing him a cup of water. Ethan looked down, then back up. "They know me." That afternoon, as they stacked the wood, Ethan stopped mid-lift. His gaze landed on the muddy porch steps. His face paled. "That's big." There in the dried mud were 3 prints, wide and deep. Toes splayed like something walking barefoot. Except they were each the size of a dinner plate. Ramona tried to explain it away. Moose. Maybe a bear, if it walked oddly. But Ethan said nothing. Just kept working, his eyes flicking now and then toward the tree line. Later she found it on the back door, a smear of dark, wet earth. 5 thick fingers trailing down the wood. The top of the print reached above her head. She touched it, still damp, still real. That night, sleep didn't come easy. The wind howled like something mourning. Trees cracked like old bones. She sat at the kitchen table, camera beside her, waiting for something to appear again, just to prove she wasn't losing it. The cabin groaned. The glass in the window rattled faintly, and then she heard it. Not steps, breath, right outside the kitchen window. Heavy, human-like, but not human. Ramona didn't move. She didn't have anywhere else to go. She didn't have anyone to call. The breath fogged the glass in small pulses. In, out, like something was studying her through the pain, not snarling, not growling, just watching. She turned slowly, heart pounding. But there was nothing. Only the dark. Only the breath on the glass that lingered just a second too long. And somewhere deep in the reflection, between her own trembling shoulders and the shadow behind her, she swore she saw the outline of something tall, something standing, and something not alone. Snow had fallen quietly the night before, just enough to blur the edges of the trees and hush the world around the cabin. By morning, it was the kind of cold that made metal sting your skin and breath rise like smoke. Ramona stood at the kitchen sink, hands deep in suds, sleeves rolled above her elbows. The smell of dish soap and wet pine filled the air. Outside, a crow called once, sharp and lonely. Then silence. There was a strange feeling between her shoulder blades, like being looked at. She turned her head slowly, and there it was, right on the other side of the window. A face, not human, not animal. Eyes dark and wide set, brows heavy, skin leathery and pale under the frost. It loomed so close the glass fogged with each breath it took. Slow, steady, in and out, like it had all the time in the world. She dropped the plate she was holding. It cracked in the sink, but didn't break. Her body locked. She couldn't scream, couldn't move, only watch. The creature stood fully upright, massive shoulders filling the frame, muscles moving beneath thick, dark fur. But what unsettled her most wasn't the size, it was how still it was, how it didn't smash the glass or growl or bare teeth. It just stared, as if studying her, as if deciding something, and then it blinked. A long, deliberate blink, and it was gone. The trees outside swayed softly, like nothing had happened. But the fog on the glass didn't lie. Neither did the outline of that face, burned into her mind with perfect, horrifying clarity. Later, as she stood outside trying to calm her breath with coffee that had gone cold, Ethan came walking up the hill with a bundle of kindling strapped to his back. His boots squeaked in the snow. He gave her a small nod like he always did, polite but quiet. "Something come through here last night?" he asked, noticing the way the wood pile was slightly knocked over. Ramona didn't answer right away. She just looked toward the trees. "There was something at my window." Ethan stopped moving. "What kind of something?" she told him. The shape, the breath, the eyes that didn't look away. His jaw clenched. His gaze dropped to the ground like he didn't want to say what he was thinking. "My grandma used to talk about 'em," he said finally. "Said they don't bother people who mind their manners. That the forest lets kind folks be." Ramona stared at him. "She said sometimes they come up to the house at night, just to look, not to hurt. Said she could feel 'em outside the walls, like they were checking, if we still lived right." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. She didn't want to admit she felt the same. That night, something tore through the chicken coop. The noise woke her before dawn. The frantic flapping of wings, a sudden crash, and then nothing but the wind again. She rushed outside in her coat and boots, flashlight shaking in her hand. The latch on the coop door was busted. One chicken was gone. No feathers, no blood. But the others were all huddled in one corner, and the straw had been repiled over them. Neatly, like someone tried to keep them warm. Ramona crouched there, breath hanging in the beam of her light, heart pounding harder the longer she stared. No animal did this. Not coyotes, not raccoons, not even bears. They killed and scattered. This was different. It was like something had reached in, taken only what it needed, and then, incredibly, tucked the rest in like a shepherd checking his flock. She stood slowly, scanned the edge of the forest. The darkness didn't answer, but she no longer believed it was empty. Later that morning, Ethan sat on the porch step, arms around his knees. Ramona handed him a mug of cocoa, and he took it wordlessly. "You ever see it?" she asked. He nodded once. "When I was little. Thought it was a dream. It was real quiet. I went out to pee behind the shed. I saw something watching me from the trees, real still, like it didn't want to scare me." Ramona sat down beside him. "Did it?" "No," he said. "I think it was making sure I got back safe." They both went quiet again. A sound like distant thunder rolled low across the hills. But it wasn't thunder. It was deeper, shorter, a kind of roar that made the glass in the cabin window shiver. Ramona looked at Ethan. He didn't flinch, but his knuckles were white around the mug. "That wasn't a bear," she said softly. "No, ma'am," he replied. She turned her eyes back to the trees. They were standing tall, innocent-looking in the pale morning light. But something lived among them. Something with breath and hands and eyes that understood more than she was ready to admit. When the day warmed just enough to melt the snow off the porch railing, Ramona took out her camera again. She'd been trying to capture the fog rolling off the creek when she noticed the reflection. Not directly, just in the chrome edge of the trailer door, a shadow behind her. Child height. She spun around, heart thudding against her ribs. But there was nothing there. only the empty cabin wall and the pine woods beyond. Still, she was certain. The feeling hadn't left. That strange, hollow heat at the base of her neck, that low thrum in her chest. She wasn't alone. That night, sleep came in shallow pieces. Once, she awoke to the sound of something brushing the outer wall. Another time, to the unmistakable creak of floorboards on the porch. Too slow to be wind, too heavy to be raccoon. She held her breath, counted to 10, waited for a knock that never came. Morning brought frost on the windows and silence in the woods. But as she opened the kitchen door to bring in more firewood, her eyes fell to something etched faintly into the condensation on the glass. A handprint, huge, smeared slightly, fingers long and wide apart. But beside it, just inches away, was another, smaller, fainter, like it had pressed gently, then pulled away before it could finish the mark. She stood there a long time, staring at it, her breath catching in her throat. The forest wasn't just watching her, it was bringing her closer. And somewhere in that slow unfolding, she wasn't sure if she was being tested or welcomed. But she knew one thing now. She was no longer just a visitor in these woods. She was part of something ancient, and it had already seen her. The chickens were screaming. Ramona jolted awake to the sharp, panicked squawks tearing through the dark like warning bells. Her heart was already racing as her feet hit the cold floor, breath stuck in her throat. She grabbed the flashlight, slipped into her coat, didn't bother with boots. The scream of bending metal rang out next, a wet, dragging sound that wasn't part of any storm. Something was outside, not just passing by. Something was testing limits. The flashlight beam jittered against the frost as she swung it toward the back door. It was shaking. The latch, the hinges, all of it was rattling like someone was trying to rip it from the frame. The flashlight flicked once, then steadied. Her breath caught. The door bowed inward with a low groan. A force slammed into it, full body, and the top hinge popped with a sick metal crunch. Ramona staggered back. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Her feet scraped against the kitchen floor as she moved in slow, terrified steps toward the hallway. The flashlight caught the edge of the door again. Another hit. This time, it cracked. Wood splintered just enough to show the outside world in slivers. A snarl of movement, steam rising off wet fur. The glint of something alive and violent. There was breath. Ramona could hear it now. Deep, controlled, but ragged at the edges, like whatever was on the other side was both injured and furious. Then the door burst open. It didn't swing, it was torn. He stepped through. Massive, covered in blood. Fresh, sticky, black-red under the porch light. Not human blood. Chicken. Feathers clung to his matted fur. His chest rose and fell with slow, heaving breaths. His hands flexed. Wide as dinner plates. Not claws, not paws. Hands. One shoulder twitched like he was fighting through pain or rage or both. She couldn't move. Couldn't even lift the flashlight. It slipped from her hand and landed with a soft clunk. He was inside her house, standing not 5 feet away. A monster that breathed like a man. His head nearly brushed the ceiling, eyes locked on hers. Ramona pressed her back to the fridge. Her legs shook beneath her. Her mind raced. Fight? No. Flight? No chance. He didn't move. They stood like that, frozen in a silent standoff, her heart slamming against her ribs, and him, just watching. His face wasn't like anything she had expected. It was weathered, yes. Wild. Deep-set eyes. Heavy brow. But something ancient lived there. Something aware. And it didn't look at her like a predator. It looked at her like she was the one in the wrong place. She didn't speak. He turned, just slightly. His upper body shifted toward the sound outside. A call. Not loud, but it changed him. His posture straightened. His muscles tensed. He didn't bolt. He retreated, slowly, carefully. He backed through the doorway, step by step, never taking his eyes off her. And then he was gone. Only the broken door remained, swinging open to the night. the cold pouring in like judgment. She stayed there, back against the fridge, for what felt like an hour. The wind bit through the open door. The chickens were quiet now. Too quiet. At some point she moved. Her hands were shaking. She tried to fix the latch, then gave up and dragged the table against the door as best she could. She barely slept. Every creak in the cabin made her flinch. Morning came without light, just a dull gray rising behind the hills. Ramona stepped outside with trembling hands, boots on this time. The ground was churned with wide tracks, deep impressions in the frozen mud, leading away from the house and from the chicken coop. The door to the coop was busted clean off. Inside, one chicken was dead, neck twisted, but the others were untouched. And the straw around them had been pulled into neat piles, covered like someone had tucked them in. She stared at the scene, confused and hollow. No predator would do this. No beast would kill one and then show mercy to the rest. It didn't make sense. Not unless the thing that had come wasn't just acting on instinct, unless it knew. Later, while sweeping up broken glass from the doorframe, she heard Ethan calling her name. He stood at the foot of the steps, eyes wide. He saw the door. He saw her face. "I heard something last night," he said. "Like, big." Ramona didn't answer. She didn't need to. He stepped closer, voice low. "I think I know where it goes, where it hides." She turned to him. "How?" His lips pressed tight. Then he nodded. "I'll show you." He led her later that afternoon, after they'd fixed the door as best they could. Snow crunched beneath their boots. The forest was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that felt like it was holding its breath. They didn't talk much. Ethan stopped near the edge of a rise above the creek, near a fallen pine that had long since become part of the slope. He pointed. "There, up past that ridge. There's a place with a shallow cave and brush piled like a blind. I seen it before, a few years back." Ramona narrowed her eyes. "How long have you known?" Ethan swallowed. "Long enough." She didn't push him, not yet. That night she climbed the attic ladder for the first time since moving in. Just a narrow crawl space under the roof. She'd stored a few boxes up there and left it alone. But something was nagging at her now. That feeling. She shone her flashlight across the beams. Dust motes swirled in the beam. Cobwebs hung loose. Nothing unusual. Until she saw the streaks, dark smudges across the far beam, faint outlines of fingers. Not recent, but not old either. Ramona reached up and touched one. Still a little damp. Her breath hitched. The cabin creaked below her, shifting in the cold. He had been inside, not just last night. Before, maybe many times. She wasn't sure how long she stayed crouched there. Flashlight held to the beam, her heart pushing against her ribs like it wanted out. All this time she thought she'd been alone. She never had been. And for the first time, that terrified her more than anything else. Because he hadn't hurt her, hadn't destroyed anything but a door. He could have. He chose not to. He had watched her, slept above her, left the chickens mostly unharmed, covered them with care. She didn't know what that meant. She only knew the rules of the forest were changing, and maybe she wasn't the one writing them anymore. Ethan said nothing when she told him. Just stared at the handprint she'd photographed and nodded, solemn and small, as if he'd been waiting for someone to believe, as if the woods were finally done keeping secrets. And she didn't yet know it, but the forest, and everything inside it, was about to ask her to choose, to see past fear, past the old stories, to see what was left when you stripped away the noise and stood face to face with something no one else was willing to understand. But for now, there was only the cold wind through the trees, and the sound of something very large, breathing again in the distance. Spring didn't arrive in McCall so much as it crept in quiet and unsure, like a stray animal testing the porch for warmth. The snow retreated in streaks along the tree line, but cold still clung to the mornings like breath on glass. Water dripped steadily from the cabin's eaves, making soft music on the old tin bucket by the back step. In that in-between season, the forest felt both raw and forgiving. The kind of place where old things stirred awake and memories loosened their grip just long enough to be named. Ethan had been quiet for days. Not in the way he usually was. Not that contained forest boy kind of silence. This was deeper. He wouldn't meet her eyes. Wouldn't linger by the porch. His footsteps were faster. His glances shorter. Ramona felt it like a change in barometric pressure, like the moment before a storm breaks, but hasn't announced itself yet. One afternoon she called after him, voice sharp enough to cut through the wind. "Ethan, you've seen more than you've said." He stopped, didn't turn, didn't speak. Just stood there on the dirt path with his back to her, like he was listening to something older than her voice. Then, softly, "I think it's time you saw where it lives." They waited for the next dry day. It came without warning, the clouds breaking like a wound. The sky turned bright and pale and trembling. They left early, boots crunching over softening mud, her pack filled with nothing but a thermos, a flashlight, and her camera. Ethan led. No hesitation. He moved like he belonged to the trees, like they remembered him. The woods thickened the farther they walked, old pine and younger fir tangled together, blocking most of the sun. Ramona kept pace, breath tight but steady. She expected bones. She expected something ominous, something that would confirm every fear she'd half let herself believe. But instead, they came to a clearing no larger than a trailer lot. There were mounds of earth, carefully formed. Some covered in moss, some circled with small branches, and at the base of a bent cedar, a shape. Wood, worn smooth, it was a carving. Crude, yes, but unmistakable. A figure. Human. Arms stretched. A face with eyes, not just sockets. The lines of it had been worked with care. Not quickly. Not like a child carving initials. This had taken time. Thought. She stepped forward, knelt in the wet grass. Another carving lay nearby, smaller, the shape of what looked like a deer. And farther still, a bird. These weren't trophies. They weren't random. They were memories. 3 years ago, Ethan said, standing behind her. It found me crying in the ravine. I'd gone out with my dad and got turned around. Ramona slowly looked up. He said to stay near the creek, but it started snowing and I panicked. I slid down the slope, tore up my ankle, couldn't climb back. I screamed for hours. His voice caught. Then I saw it, standing above me like it had always been there. I thought I was going to die, but it came down, slow, careful, didn't touch me, just sat nearby until I passed out. When I woke up, there was this big pile of leaves over me, my coat wrapped tighter, and fish, like it left food. He finally looked at her. I never told anyone, not even Grams. But I came back, brought apples, left them on a stump. They were gone the next day, so I kept coming. We never spoke, never touched, but it was like we understood. Ramona stood slowly, brushing her hands against her thighs, eyes still on the carvings. "This isn't just territory," she whispered. "It's home." That night she couldn't sleep. There was too much stirring. The carvings wouldn't leave her mind. That slow, deliberate care. Like grief, etched into wood. Like someone trying to remember. Or not forget. She got up sometime past midnight. Poured a glass of water. The floor groaned under her step. She stared at the window above the sink. The same window where the breath had fogged the glass weeks ago. Nothing. She turned. But then, in the very corner of her vision, movement. She stepped outside barefoot, the cold biting sharp into her soles. Moonlight caught the trees in silver, but something else moved among them, low, not crouching, just small. Ramona froze. A shape, no taller than a child. It didn't flee, just stood. The wind lifted, and for the briefest second, the smell of wet earth and something like moss reached her. Not decay, not danger, just wilderness, pure and unfiltered. The shape blinked once, then turned and disappeared into the trees. Morning came with birdsong, the first in weeks. As if the forest had decided finally that it could breathe again, Ramona told Ethan about what she saw. He didn't seem surprised. "There's more than one," he said simply. Then he led her down a different path. Not far from the creek, they came across something tucked into the underbrush. A clearing. But this one, different. More hidden. Tiny graves, fresh-turned soil, some marked with stones, others with feathers tied into sticks. One with what looked like a single lock of fur bound by twine. Ramona knelt, hand over her mouth. "This is a burial site." Ethan nodded. She traced a finger along one of the sticks. There was a symbol scratched into it. Circles, repeated, interlocking. "This isn't random." He pointed to a tree nearby, carved into its bark, a wide, rough spiral. "They remember," Ethan said. "Even the dead." Later that afternoon, while checking the chicken coop, Ramona found something strange near the woodpile. A cloth, frayed, old, but folded. Inside it, a handful of feathers and a raw egg, uncracked. It was a gift. She didn't know what it meant, but it wasn't human, and it wasn't cruel. By evening, the air had turned thick again. Clouds stacked like bruises along the ridgeline. The forest fell silent in the way it only did before something shifted. She stood on the porch, camera in hand, scanning the tree line. Something had changed. She didn't feel watched anymore. She felt included. Ethan leaned against the railing beside her. "You think it's alone?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, I think it just doesn't show the rest until it trusts." They stood there a long time, dusk bleeding into night. Ramona didn't say it aloud, but something in her had started to hope. Not for safety, not for peace, but for proof. That something out there knew gentleness. That something born of wild things still remembered how to be kind. She didn't know what was coming next. She didn't know that the past, not hers, but someone else's, would come knocking before spring could fully settle. But she felt it, like a heartbeat under the soil. Something was shifting, and this story wasn't just hers anymore. Summer came like it was running from something, hot, fast, and full of restless wind that pushed through the trees like whispers trying not to be heard. The pines stayed still, but the world underneath them shifted in ways Ramona could feel in her bones. There was a hum in the air, low and steady, like the forest had started holding its breath again. The noise started beneath the floorboards, barely there at first. Just a soft, dull tap. Then another, slow, too precise for rodents, too purposeful for pipes. The kind of sound that made her pause mid-step, tilt her head, and wait for the silence to swallow it up again. But it didn't. It came again the next night, and the next. Louder now. A dragging scrape, a shuffle. Sometimes right beneath the kitchen, other times below her bed. She lay awake, eyes open in the dark, counting seconds between each sound like they were warnings. She thought of pipes, raccoons, warped wood, told herself stories she could live with. Until one night after the noise stopped, the cellar door creaked open by itself. She found the trap door hidden behind a false panel under the rug. Not a cellar. Not really. A crawl space, half dug, with rotting wooden steps and a smell like wet ash and forgotten paper. She hesitated, flashlight trembling in her hand. Then she went down. The light caught edges first. Boxes, metal tins, stacks of old tools. A rolled tarp with rust stains. A pair of boots she didn't recognize. And then, pushed up against the stone wall, a trunk. Heavy, locked with a single hook that crumbled when she touched it. The lid creaked like it hadn't been opened in decades. Inside were notebooks, hand-bound, yellowed at the edges, pages covered in tight handwriting, half-faded. Beside them, a plastic cassette recorder, dusty, battery-operated. She pressed play. Static, then a voice. Howard. Calm, steady, the kind of voice used when saying things no one's supposed to hear. Observation log, October 5th, 1979. Subject returned to creek bed. carried what appeared to be deceased juvenile, left it beside the trail, seemed distressed, not aggressive. Stayed near the body for over an hour. Rocking motion, low vocalizations. Ramona's skin prickled. Her thumb trembled against the pause button. She flipped through one of the notebooks. Page after page. Sketches, timelines, trails marked in red ink. Symbols beside certain days. Drawings of feet, hands, eyes. Then one entry underlined twice. Tried to help, called Wexler. Regret. She closed the notebook. Sat still in the cold dirt for a long while. The silence felt like judgment. Outside, the trees didn't move, but the air carried tension like heat. She asked Marlene about it the next day. The woman went pale. Set her glass down hard enough to crack it. That man couldn't leave well enough alone, she muttered. Always thought he was a savior. Thought he was owed something. Owed what? The truth. That's what he said. Said the world needed to know. I told him not everything belongs to people. Some things need to stay wild. Marlene lit a cigarette with shaking fingers. Blew smoke through her teeth like it was holding in a scream. He called someone, didn't he? Ramona asked. Marlene didn't answer, but she didn't have to. That night, Ramona sat on the porch with a journal on her lap. The breeze carried a warmth that didn't belong to the mountains. She stared into the trees, listening to nothing, hearing everything. Ethan didn't come the next morning. Not by 9. Not by noon. Not by dusk. She checked the trail. No footprints. No note. When she called his name down the path, the forest swallowed it. She waited until first dark, then grabbed her flashlight and walked. 2 miles out, she found the broken sapling. Snapped halfway up. Not torn. A sign. Another 20 feet. A strip of flannel caught on a branch. Then the footprints. Small ones. Ethan's boots, pressed deep into the mud. Beside them, larger ones, bare, wide, spaced far apart, walking beside him, not chasing, not dragging, just walking. Her knees buckled. She followed. The trail led toward the old ravine, past the broken cedar and into thicker brush where the light didn't reach. The air smelled damp. She moved faster. Then she heard it. A growl, not like anything she'd heard before. Low, vibrating, so full of breath it felt like it moved the trees. She burst through the clearing and froze. Ethan stood between 2 firs, hands raised, eyes locked on something massive crouched between him and the water. A black bear, full grown, aggressive posture, jaw low, front paw scraping the dirt. It hadn't seen her yet, but something else had. To the right, half-shadowed, stood a figure twice her height. Fur matted, arms wide, chest rising like a furnace. It stepped between Ethan and the bear, soundless but certain. It didn't attack. It didn't roar. It just stood there. A wall of breath and bone and patience. The bear hesitated, snorted once, then backed off slowly. It turned, grunted, and disappeared into the trees. Ramona exhaled for the first time in minutes. Ethan ran to her, arms shaking. I didn't run, he whispered. I knew it wouldn't let anything happen. She looked toward the trees. The figure was still watching, breathing hard, one arm cradling its side. Blood, not bear's, its own. She took a step forward, hand raised. It didn't move, just stared. Something behind the eyes that wasn't wild. Not exactly. Then it turned and vanished. She didn't sleep that night. She replayed the bear. The way it stood, the way it bowed. The way the other stood taller, but not to intimidate, to shield. She sat with the journals, read deeper. The part where Howard described the young one. Wounded, carried in its arms. Brought to the edge of the cabin like an offering, a plea. Help, he'd written. It asked for help in its way. Then he'd called Wexler, and a bullet answered. She wept into her hands, silent and shaking because she saw it now. We fail what we don't understand, and we destroy what we fear. But somehow, through all of it, something in the woods had chosen to show mercy anyway. Ramona closed the last notebook. The forest outside pulsed with insects and distant wind. And somewhere out there, someone who had every reason to hate was still watching over the boy who never stopped believing. And her, the woman who had once been too broken to believe anything could still be sacred. She didn't know what the next day would bring, but she knew the ground had shifted, not beneath her feet, inside her heart. And that, maybe, was the most dangerous change of all. Under the harsh summer glare, the trees looked brittle. The air over McCall was dry enough to sting the skin and thick enough to press on the lungs. Even the birds were quieter. The world held a kind of heavy silence that didn't belong to wind or heat. It belonged to waiting, to knowing something was already coming. Ramona felt it the second she saw the truck. It wasn't from around here. Mud-slicked wheels, faded military green paint, Idaho plates almost scraped clean, and a driver who didn't smile. He pulled up slow, dust curling behind him, engine ticking like something old and resentful. She was hauling firewood when he stopped at the base of the driveway. Didn't get out, just watched. She wiped her hands on her jeans and met his stare head-on. He finally rolled the window down, a low creak that matched the lines in his face. A man in his 50s, maybe older. Rough skin, eyes like split flint. The kind of man who once prayed to reason but had since made peace with violence. "You, Ramona?" His voice had gravel in it. Not anger, just absence. She nodded. He stepped out. Big boots, broad shoulders under a sun-bleached jacket. His hands were nicked, scarred. Gun oil smell mixed with cigarette ash. She could feel it before he said his name. Carl Wexler. It fell like a stone. She'd seen that name in Howard's journals, circled more than once. The one who came when no one should have. The one who answered mercy with a rifle. "What do you want?" He shrugged. "Just passing through. Heard there was someone up here who might have seen something she didn't understand." Ramona didn't blink. "I understand enough." He looked around, slow, studying the edges of her world. The trees, the dirt path, the window glass still marked faintly from fingers too large to be human. "I used to think I understood too," he said quietly. "Then my brother went missing in these woods. 1978. He was 12. I was 22. She felt the shift then, the way his jaw tightened when he said it. Not performance, not pity hunting. Something deeper, rawer. The kind of wound that never healed because it never found the thing that made it bleed. "You think they took him?" she asked. "I don't think I know." He pulled a photo from his pocket, edges bent. A boy with a crooked smile and a freckled nose, holding a slingshot. Ramona took it, looked longer than she meant to. "I'm sorry," she said. He nodded once, then tucked the photo away. "I know Howard tried to study them, thought they were special, misunderstood, thought he could watch without interfering." Carl's mouth turned bitter. "He was wrong. They're not some gentle giants hiding in the hills. They're animals. And sooner or later, animals get hungry." He stepped closer. "I don't want to hurt you. I just want the truth." She stood her ground. "The truth is complicated." "No," he said. "The truth is out there, and it has a face." Later that night, she found Ethan crouched behind the barn. His face was pale, his hands trembling. "He was at my house this morning," the boy whispered. "Told Grams I was lying. Said I was keeping something dangerous." Ramona felt her stomach turn. He said he was going to prove it. By morning, Ethan was gone. No note. No boots missing. Just gone. Ramona searched the yard. Then the trails. She called until her voice went hoarse. Hours passed. The sun moved overhead like it was watching. Then she saw the footprints. Not Ethan's. Heavy boots. Dragging marks. And rope. She followed. The trail led to the creek, and past it, to the hollow where the earth held the old memories Ethan once showed her. And there, she saw him. Ethan, bound, propped against a tree like bait. Ramona gasped, knees going weak, heart in her throat. A few feet away, Carl crouched low, rifle across his lap, face locked in some mix of grief and calculation. "He's safe," he said. "For now." Ramona rushed to the boy, started working at the knot. Carl stood. "Don't," he warned. She kept working. "Don't you understand? I'm not trying to hurt the kid. I just need something real, something alive, something the world can't deny." Ethan groaned. His lips were cracked. Ramona freed his wrists, pulled him into her arms. Then she heard it. Not wind, Not deer, a shift, a breath. She turned slowly. He stepped from the shadows, taller than she remembered, broader, every inch of him trembling with restraint. He didn't growl. He didn't bare teeth. He simply stepped between Carl and the child and opened his arms, wide, a stance she didn't understand at first. Then she did. Not a threat, a shield. Ramona saw Carl's hands twitch on the stock. "Don't," she whispered. Carl's eyes darted. "He's standing between me and the proof. He's standing between you and a mistake." The wind picked up, leaves scattered. The forest held its breath. Carl lifted the rifle. The creature didn't flinch, didn't back down, just stood, breathing hard, eyes locked on Ramona's. She moved, stood in front of Ethan, then stepped beside the creature, close enough to hear its breath, to see the tremble in his side. An old wound, unhealed. Carl's hands shook. "This isn't what I wanted," he said, voice cracking. Ramona nodded. "I know." He lowered the gun. For a moment, everything held. Stillness, breath, hope. And then Carl whispered, "We finish it tonight." He turned, walked back toward the path, and Ramona knew the forest wouldn't sleep again until the sun rose. That night, the wind howled through the trees like something trying to warn them. Ramona sat with Ethan on the floor of the cabin, both of them wrapped in silence. "I think he wants to believe he's saving us," Ethan said. Ramona looked toward the trees. "Or maybe," she whispered, "he's just trying not to drown in what he lost." The shadows stretched long across the porch, and somewhere in the dark, a heartbeat waited for dawn. The wind changed just after midnight. It swept through the valley like a voice with no mouth, rattling the pine needles and flattening the tall grass in slow waves. The kind of wind that didn't belong to summer anymore. It carried the weight of something ending. And in the dark cabin tucked near the edge of the tree line, Ramona sat wide-eyed and sleepless, watching the flame in the lantern dance as if it too sensed what was coming. She hadn't spoken much since Carl left the porch that night. Neither had Ethan. There was a heaviness to the air between them now. Not fear exactly, but recognition. A truth they'd both been circling finally had a name. The decision wasn't far off, and it wouldn't be made by comfort or reason. It would be made by instinct, and someone was going to get hurt. Rain came first, a slow, steady drumming on the tin roof that turned the ground to slick clay and sent shadows writhing along the porch rails. Then thunder cracked the ridgeline, and the trees swayed like they remembered something ancient. Ramona stood at the window, watching, her breath fogging the pain. She reached for the rifle she hadn't touched since fall and checked the chamber. She hated it. Hated how natural it felt in her hands again. "I don't want it to come to this," she whispered to herself. But the forest wasn't listening. Somewhere out there, Carl was moving, hunting, driven not just by anger anymore, but something colder, a belief that what he was about to do wasn't revenge. It was closure. She stepped outside. The rain soaked through her jacket fast, and her boots sank into the mud with every step. The sky was lit by lightning that never seemed to crack fully, just glowed and faded, like a warning without words. She followed the slope behind the cabin, the same one that led toward the ravine. Her flashlight stayed off. She didn't need it. The storm lit enough. And besides, she didn't want to be seen. The sound came sharp and sudden, a long, ragged howl splitting the dark like a blade. It was pain, not rage, and it didn't come from any dog or wolf. Ramona ran. She slid twice, grabbed at wet roots, felt her knees hit rock. But she kept going, through brush, over fallen logs, until she saw the glint of steel in the distance, a trap. Carl had set it along the animal path that wound near the old dry creek. He knew the patterns, the trails, and he'd waited until the storm masked his scent. Ramona crouched low behind a moss-covered boulder. Her breath came shallow. Lightning lit the clearing again, and this time she saw it. Massive, crumpled, struggling. The creature lay on its side, leg twisted in the steel jaws of the trap. Blood soaked the ground beneath him, black in the stormlight. His chest rose and fell like thunder. His fingers clawed the dirt, trying not to scream again. But the pain betrayed him. Ramona moved. She didn't think. She didn't plan. She just moved. The creature saw her, eyes wide, teeth bared, not at her, but at the pain. His whole body shook. She raised one hand slowly. "I'm here," she whispered. She dropped the rifle. She stepped closer, and then, through the trees behind her, footsteps, fast, heavy. Carl emerged with his rifle already raised, mud up to his knees, jaws set like stone. "Get away from it!" he shouted. Ramona didn't move. "He's bleeding out," she said. "That's the point." "No, it's not." "It killed my brother." She turned to face him, arms spread, blocking the shot. "You don't know that." Carl's hands trembled on the grip. "I saw the prints. I saw the blood." "You saw what you needed to see, because the truth was too hard." Behind her, the creature groaned, still breathing, still trying to rise. Carl shook his head. His voice cracked. "I was supposed to protect him. I let him go into those woods. I told him the trees were safe. And maybe they were," Ramona said. "Until we stopped listening." Another crack of thunder rolled through the sky. Closer this time. Ramona dropped to her knees beside the trap. The steel was rusted, the hinges tight. Her hand slipped on the blood-slick metal. She pulled a knife from her belt, wedged it into the mechanism, leveraged it with all her weight. The trap clicked. The jaws sprang open. The creature flinched, but didn't run. Carl stepped forward. "Don't do this." Ramona stood between them again. "He protected Ethan. He could have killed us. He didn't." "You don't know what else it's done," Carl growled. "I know what you're doing now," she said. "And I know it's not about justice." She picked up the rifle, but she didn't point it at Carl. She raised it to the sky and fired. The sound ripped through the trees like a final warning. Birds scattered. The wind shifted again. Carl stood frozen, breathing hard. Then, behind Ramona, the creature stirred. Slowly, painfully. He rose to one knee. His eyes never left Carl's, and in the rain-soaked dark, something passed between them. Not forgiveness, not hatred, recognition. Carl lowered his gun. And in that moment of fragile quiet, Ramona turned, reached for the trap, threw it into the bushes like something cursed. Then she felt it. The shift. A sound behind her. She turned. Carl's rifle was raised again, but not at her, at the creature. "Don't!" she screamed, but the shot rang out. She watched it unfold like a dream she couldn't wake from. The creature moved faster than she thought possible. He didn't run. He didn't attack. He stepped between her and the bullet. The impact spun him slightly. He grunted, low and pained, then turned his body to shield her again, and when Carl raised the gun a second time, the creature charged. He didn't kill. He didn't maim. He struck Carl with one massive arm, sent him flying into a tree, hard enough to knock the wind from his chest. Carl crumpled, alive, moaning, but not broken. The creature stood over him, breathing, bleeding, then stepped back. He looked to Ramona, eyes clouded with pain, but behind them trust. She reached for him, but he turned, limped into the trees, his trail marked in blood and silence. Ramona collapsed beside Ethan's empty rope. Her breath came in sobs. Carl groaned behind her. The rain softened to mist. The trees swayed again, not in warning, but in mourning. And somewhere beyond them, a shadow disappeared into the wild. Ramona didn't know if she'd see him again, but she knew what he chose. And that choice said more than words ever could. The leaves began to turn again, quietly at first. Just a few at the edges, like the forest was testing the idea of change. McCall in late September always held its breath like that, caught between the memory of fire and the hush of snow, still waiting to arrive. Ramona moved slower now, not from fear, from knowing. Her steps through the brush had shifted, less urgent, more like belonging. The air no longer pressed against her like a stranger. It felt like something that had made space for her. The trail behind the cabin still held the faded bloodstains if you knew where to look, but rain had softened them. Moss reached in like it was trying to cover what didn't need to be remembered in the way people usually did. She followed it, down toward the creek, toward where the pine trees thickened and the world tilted just enough to feel separate from everything else. It had been weeks since the night of the trap, since Carl's gun split the silence, since forgiveness showed up in the form of a wounded giant choosing not to kill the man who had tried to end him. Carl never came back. He limped out of the forest that night alone, one arm clutching his ribs, eyes hollow in a way no doctor could fix. He didn't look at Ramona when he passed her porch, just nodded once, as if saying, "I saw." And then he disappeared down the dirt road with a truck that coughed smoke and a burden heavier than justice ever was. Maybe that was the end of his story. Maybe not. She'd stopped needing to know. What mattered now was the way the pines leaned over the trail that morning, how the air smelled damp with yesterday's rain, and how the silence didn't feel empty anymore. She found him near the water, limping still, but standing, one hand pressed to his side where the bullet had grazed something vital. The fur was thinner there, skin still pink and healing. He didn't move when she stepped into view, just turned his head slightly, enough to show he recognized her. She knelt beside the stream, pulled the cloth from her pack, unwrapped the salve she'd made from pine resin and bear fat, the way her grandmother once showed her when she was young and curious, and still believed in things that didn't make sense on paper. He watched, silent. She didn't ask permission. She just reached, gently. When her hand touched the wound, he flinched, but didn't stop her. The silence between them thickened, not the kind that separates, the kind that understands. She worked slowly, careful not to press too hard. His breath came deep and steady. She could feel the heat of him through her sleeve, could see the mud still dried in the creases of his knuckles, the scars along his ribs, the quiet in his eyes that didn't feel like animal or man, but something between. She thought about how long he'd been hiding, surviving, choosing solitude not because it was safer, but because no one had ever given him another option. Her fingers lingered a second longer than they needed to. He looked at her, truly looked, and lifted his hand, not fast, not threatening. He pressed it, broad and rough, gently to her chest, right over her heart. Her breath hitched, not from fear, but from the strange, aching recognition that bloomed in her chest like something ancient, something true. It felt like a goodbye, but not the kind that leaves, the kind that sees you. She blinked back the warmth in her eyes and nodded once, and then he stepped back. Ramona thought that might be the last time, but it wasn't, because the next morning the fog rolled in heavy, and when she stepped onto her porch, coffee mug in hand, the world was soaked in silver. She didn't see them at first, not until the wind moved just right. 3 shapes stood at the edge of the woods. One him, taller now, straighter. Beside him, smaller, younger, shoulders narrower, movement sharper, eyes like fire caught in amber. And between them, just barely visible, something smaller still. Ramona's heart cracked open without warning. They weren't ghosts. They weren't legends. They were family. And they'd come back to show her. He'd never been alone. Not really. He'd just never been safe enough to show the rest of himself. Until now. The sun broke through the fog in slow golden slices. The trees stood still. The forest watched. She didn't wave, didn't speak, just stood there, letting them see her, letting them decide what to leave behind. When the fog lifted fully, the clearing was empty again. But that afternoon, while scrubbing the kitchen window, she saw it, pressed faintly into the condensation from the inside of the glass. A handprint, broad, familiar, and beside it smaller, delicate, not hers. She touched the glass, warm, the memory still clinging there. Ethan found her on the porch later, sun dipping low. You saw them? She nodded. Think they'll come back? He asked. Ramona smiled softly. I think they already did. The wind moved through the trees then, slow and long, like something exhaling after holding its breath for years. No sound, no rush, just that deep, distant rumble. Not a warning, not a threat, like a voice buried in the bark and soil, whispering one last thing before winter arrived. "Thank you." She didn't say anything, just closed her eyes and listened. Sometimes it's not about the monsters we fear, but the silence we've ignored for too long. The woods, the wild, the shadow in the corner of our eye. We grow up being told these things are dangerous, unknowable, meant to be avoided. But maybe what we call myth is simply truth waiting for someone to listen without judgment. Maybe the wilderness doesn't ask us to conquer it, only to respect it. Maybe the ones we call creatures are just survivors of a world we forgot how to share. This story, like so many untold ones, reminds us that kindness isn't weakness. It's the oldest form of bravery. It asks us to see past fear, past loss, past the noise of old pain echoing louder than reason. It invites us to step toward the unknown not with weapons or walls, but with open hands and a willingness to understand. And in doing so, we're reminded of something deeply human. Compassion doesn't require permission. It requires courage. Forgiveness, when it happens, doesn't erase the scars, but it offers a place for healing to begin. In the stillness between harm and harmony, there is a choice. And that choice, no matter how small, can echo for generations. What we protect, what we nurture, what we choose to trust. It defines us more than any past mistake. Some stories are meant to change the way we look at the world. Others change the way we look at each other. This was one of those stories. If something in this journey touched you, if a moment made you pause, reflect, or feel a little less alone, please take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to know where in the world you're watching from, what this story meant to you, and how you see the forest now, after walking this path with us. Don't forget to like and subscribe so we can continue to build this quiet community of hearts that still believe in the unseen, the misunderstood, and the beautifully wild. From all of us, thank you for listening.